very first stop on our tour today is here in the Sacred Stewardship exhibit. And one of my all-time favorite scriptures is the one right here behind me. It says, "All things denote there is a God, yea, even the earth, and all things that are upon the face of it, yea, and its motion, yea, and also all the planets which move in their regular form, do witness that there is a supreme creator." And that's Alma 30:44. So I'm grateful to my Heavenly Father for the gift of this beautiful earth. All of the things on the face of it truly do testify of Him and of the Savior. And that's one reason I believe that it's so important to learn about the natural world. Our earth is a gift from God, and as stewards of that gift, it's our responsibility to care for all the forms of life and all the natural resources on the planet. Our mission statement at the Bee Museum is to inspire wonder and reverence for our living planet. I hope that as we tour through all the exhibits today, you'll be able to gain a greater appreciation for the many beautiful forms of life in God's creations. So, welcome to the African savannah. And here we're going to talk about the Gerenuk, the dik-dik, and the impala. So, these three antelope all eat from the same kind of tree, called an acacia tree. But instead of competing with each other for the same exact resources, they each have unique traits that allow them to eat from different parts of the tree. The dik-dik is the smallest antelope in this group. They eat from the lowest branches of the tree with a pointy, flexible nose that allows them to reach between the acacia's long thorns and get at those leaves. The impala is usually the largest in overall mass out of the three antelope, but it eats out of the middle portion of the tree. They prefer to eat the less thorny acacias, but often these easy-to-eat trees grow near large carnivores like lions. Studies have found that when the acacias are growing in areas with fewer predators, they actually make more thorns. The impalas have to choose between feeding in predator territory or eating from thornier trees, and while they don't like thorns, they dislike carnivores even more. Finally, the Gerenuk uses this strange long neck and its long legs and stretches up to eat the leaves from the very top of the tree. They're able to get at the leaves that the impalas can't reach. Antelope, like the dik-dik, the impala, and the Gerenuk, are part of a group of animals in the cow, goat, and sheep family, which is called Bovidae, that don't fit anywhere else. Like the rest of the animals in Bovidae, they're also all ruminants. So you've probably seen a cow chewing its cud. That behavior is common for all ruminants because it's part of the way they digest the tough cellulose in the plants that they eat. All ruminants rely on a symbiotic relationship with bacteria living in their stomach. When the animal eats, the plant material goes into a special portion of their stomach called the rumen, where thousands of tiny bacteria start to break it down. The environment inside the animal's stomach is anaerobic, so bacteria have to rely on fermentation to break down the cellulose, converting it into sugars. The ruminants often regurgitate that half-fermented food and chew it to help break down even more, and then swallow it again to allow the bacteria to break it down even more, and then regurgitate it again, and they keep doing this so that it makes it easier for the bacteria to get more sugars out of that cellulose, and that's where their cud comes from. Through this process, the bacteria are able to have a constant supply of food, and the ruminants are able to access nutrients that they wouldn't be able to get at on their own, which means that the antelope don't have to look for quite as much acacia leaves. With the bacteria's help, they're much more efficient at getting the energy they need from their food. It's why we can't really gain weight from eating salad, but ruminants can. So the ruminants have a relationship with bacteria to digest acacia, but some types of acacia trees also form a relationship with different tiny creatures to fight off the herbivores. Instead of just relying on thorns or on growing in the presence of carnivores, some species of acacia form a relationship with certain species of ants. By producing nutrient sacs on the tips of their leaves and tasty nectar in little special glands, the acacia entices ants to build homes inside its hollow thorns. The ants then become incredible defenders. They kill nearby vegetation so the acacia doesn't have to worry about competition, and they attack small herbivores like rodents. They also spread useful bacteria around on the leaves that inhibits the growth of fungi and disease. The relationship allows the acacias to grow much bigger, and it makes it easier for both species, the ants and the acacia, to survive in difficult conditions like droughts. Our evolution exhibit answers a question that we've all heard at one time or another. Which came first, the chicken or the egg? Luna Lovegood would say that a circle has no beginning, but science would say that it's not exactly a circle. Phylogenetic trees aren't necessarily solid fact. we often don't know exactly what path evolution took to get us to the species we have today. But by looking at fossil records and genetics, we can be relatively sure about some things. For example, we know that amniotic eggs that are laid on land rather than in the water, have existed for a long time. The exact time is debated, but the general consensus seems to be that they first appeared around 340 million years ago. Our modern chicken, in its current domesticated form, has only been around for about 58,000 years at the longest estimates. As we come further down the phylogenetic tree into more recent eras, it's easier to use genetic sequencing to determine the relationships between different species. But even then, scientists debate and change the grouping all the time. For example, the skunk used to be a member of the family Mustelidae, which also contains weasels and otters, but recent evidence has led to the creation of a unique family for skunks called Mephididae, still in the order Carnivora. Some animals have traits that make it seem like they should be closely related on a phylogenetic tree, but actually evolved separately. For example, flight evolved in several different forms throughout the animal kingdom. We've seen it in pteranodons, bats, birds, and insects, but the different types of wings appeared each time after their major groups had already broken away from each other. That's why comparing the genetics of different species can be helpful in understanding how animals are really related. This is the waterfowl exhibit, home of over 150 different species from the family of birds called Anatidae. That's the family containing ducks, geese, and swans, or waterfowl. Today, we're going to talk about the bar-headed goose, which is one of my new favorite species of waterfowl. Like many other species of waterfowl, it migrates from wintering grounds to breeding grounds each year. This species goes from populations in southern Asia to breeding grounds in Central Asia, where colonies of thousands of birds come together, providing opportunities for gene flow between the different groups. When bar-headed geese migrate, they fly over the Himalayas, which I'm sure you know is the tallest mountain range in the world. To put that into perspective, I grew up in Texas, which was about 550 feet of elevation, and here in Provo, I get winded just from going up the stairs, where we're at about 4,500 feet of elevation. When they cross the Himalayas, bar-headed geese have been observed flying at heights of 23,000 feet. And they often make that highest part of their journey in 8 hours. If a human tried to climb that high that quickly, we would die because we can't acclimate that fast. The altitude presents several big problems to the migrating geese. First, like I mentioned, the higher you go, the harder it gets to breathe. The oxygen in the bar-headed goose's flight path can be as low as 10% of the oxygen that you'd find at sea level. Scientists still aren't completely sure how they do it, but compared to other geese, bar-headed geese have bigger lungs, more capillaries, more red blood cells, and they can hyperventilate without getting dizzy. Altogether, this maximizes the oxygen that they can take into their blood. Another problem is that because the air is so thin, it's hard for the geese to generate lift. It's why an airplane can't just fly into space. The higher you go, the thinner the air gets, and there's less to hold you up. Bar-headed geese don't go quite as high as an airplane can, but they do have to work harder to get to the tops of those mountains, which uses a lot of energy. Scientists have found that the area of bar-headed geese's wings are slightly larger compared to their weight than the area of other goose wings, which may be helping generate that extra lift to keep them in the air. Another problem is that it's really cold when you get up this high. The air could instantly freeze flesh, but the bar-headed goose constantly flaps its wings as it flies, generating heat which is trapped by their downy feathers. No one really knows why the bar-headed goose doesn't just choose an easier migration path, but migration is often passed between generations. It may be that the bar-headed geese have been making this trip for millions of years, long before the Himalayas were as tall as they are now. One of our most popular specimens here at the museum is Shasta. She was born at the Hogle Zoo back in 1948. Her father was an African lion, and her mother was a Bengal tiger, which makes Shasta a Liger. If that had been the other way around, a lioness as a mother and a tiger as a father, she would have been a Tigon, which is slightly smaller than a tiger due to the growth inhibiting gene carried by female lions. Male Ligers are born sterile, but female Ligers can actually have offspring of their own by breeding with other lions or tigers, which has led to the breeding of animals like Ligers or Ligers. In the wild, this sort of hybrid is very, very unlikely. A long time ago, the lion's range spread all the way up into Asia and even into parts of Europe. The tiger's range was much bigger too, occupying parts of Asia much farther west than they are now. Back then, the lion and tiger ranges may have overlapped, but there's no real evidence that they actually hybridized naturally. Over time, climate change, habitat loss, and hunting by humans has driven down both animals' ranges to be much smaller, and they will probably never run into each other in the wild unless an animal is far outside of its normal range. Either way, lions and tigers are unlikely to mate unless humans have a hand in it, and this kind of hybridizing can cause a lot of health problems for the offspring. Shasta was lucky to have lived to be 24 years old, which is about average for a lion and a little longer than a tiger. But Shasta was the oldest liger I was able to find a record of. Many ligers suffer from neurological defects or organ failures, and many have to be born through C-section because they're too large for their tiger mothers. Hybridizations like Shasta don't fit the missions of most modern zoos, which is to conserve and preserve natural exotic wildlife. But they are interesting to learn about, and that's why Shasta is here at the museum. This is our freshwater exhibit. Rivers and streams, like the one exhibited here, are usually called riparian areas, and they have moving water. Here you can find many different species. Charismatic animals like river otters and salamanders and turtles, different avian species like songbirds and osprey, many kinds of fish of course like trout, sculpin, and whitefish, and a whole host of tiny organisms like insect larvae, cyanobacteria, and diatoms. North American river otters, like these ones here, are great swimmers, using webbed feet and thick rudder-like tails to propel and steer themselves through the water. They can close their ears and nose to keep out water, and they have a clear third eyelid called a nictitating membrane, which provides a sort of natural pair of goggles to protect their eyes. They also have some of the densest fur in the animal kingdom. With 370,000 squares per hair inch, they have more than 3 times the amount of hair in 1 square inch than most humans have on their entire head. River otters usually have young in May or June. In warm areas like Louisiana or Florida, they mate in the early spring, and their gestation lasts for about 58 days. If they wait too long to find a mate, the baby otters could be too small to survive by the time winter comes around again. But in colder climates, like here in Utah, the rivers are often frozen over in the early spring. For an animal who usually gets around by swimming, it can be hard to find a mate. Fish can continue swimming below the surface, but river otters have a hard time breaking through the ice. Instead of risking having a litter late in the summer, river otters in these climates find a mate during the previous fall. The females then exhibit delayed implantation, which means that the fertilized egg waits as long as 9 months before developing into a fetus. By the time the babies are born, it can be as long as a year after conception. Welcome to the insect exhibit. I've heard many visitors here say that the giant butterfly made of butterflies is their favorite part of the museum. In this display, there are about 1,026 individual butterflies and moths. It seems like a lot of butterflies, but it doesn't represent even a tiny fraction of all the species of butterflies and moths in Lepidoptera, which is the order of insects that contains butterflies and moths. That order has about 160,000 species, and those are only the ones that have been described. There could be another 150,000 species just waiting to be discovered. With so many species, it's no wonder that moths and butterflies are so important to ecosystems around the world. Both moths and butterflies are major contributors to pollination. If they were to disappear, many species of plants would disappear too. This is because many flowers have evolved specifically to attract either moths or butterflies. Butterflies, for example, like most of those here in the giant butterfly, are mostly diurnal. Plants that rely on butterflies for pollination often have brightly colored flowers that stand out in the daytime and bloom during the daytime. They produce nectar just for the butterflies, hiding it deep down in the flower where only the butterfly's long proboscis can reach, instead of other insects like beetles. Moths, on the other hand, are often nocturnal. To get their attention, some flowers, like the yucca, have developed pale or white coloration to reflect the most light. Even more interesting, they open at night, making a strong and sweet scent to attract those nocturnal moths. The adaptations from the flowers allow for a very important relationship between moths and butterflies and plants. The plants provide food to the butterflies in the form of nectar, and also food for their caterpillars, because the butterflies will lay eggs on the leaves, and as the caterpillars hatch, they're able to eat those leaves. By providing these resources to the butterflies, the flowers often receive a mechanism for transferring their genes to new flowers. This can be especially important in fragmented habitat, where separate small populations of plants wouldn't be able to persist without a mechanism like a pollinator to carry their pollen and help them exchange their genes. Up on our top floor is the Apex Predators exhibit, and some of my favorite animals up here are from the Arctic tundra. The polar bear and the Arctic fox behind me both exhibit that white coloration that's pretty common in their environment, but while the Arctic fox's fur is truly white, the polar bear's fur is actually clear and hollow. The white coloration comes from light bouncing around between and inside those hairs. The hollow centers allow the fur to be very efficient at trapping heat. When combined with their black, heat-absorbing skin and a layer of fat that is almost 5 inches deep, they're able to stay very warm and can even overheat when they run, when it's well below 0 degrees. When polar bears grow a new coat, it comes out looking fresh and white, but over time, the hair starts to get kind of a yellow coloration. A lot of this comes from the oil in the seals that they eat, and it actually works pretty well for polar bears, especially in more southern areas of their range, because that yellow coloration starts to come on in the summer, when they don't want to stand out as much when there's not as much snow. Arctic foxes solve the camouflage problem by molting twice. Once in the winter, when they get their pure white coat like you see here, and once in the spring, when they change to a sort of grayish brown. Their small ears and their tiny feet help them to reduce the surface area of their body, minimizing the amount of heat that's lost to their environment. Their tiny feet are also the source of their scientific name, which is Vulpes legopus, and roughly translate to a fox with rabbit feet. This is because they have hair on their paw pads, and rabbits also have hairy feet. For the Arctic fox, it helps them to keep their feet nice and warm when they're walking around on snow and ice. Arctic foxes mostly eat small mammals like lemmings and voles, and in years when these small mammals are plentiful, Arctic foxes have high survival rates and larger litter sizes. But in sparse years, Arctic foxes have to rely on other prey. They'll eat birds, fish, they'll take seal pups out of their dens in the snow, and some will eat carrion. Some will even follow polar bears around to eat the leftovers of whatever seals the polar bear has caught. Exhibit is the African lion. Here behind me, you can see lions, lionesses, and lion cubs. And we're all pretty familiar with lions and know that they live in these big groups called prides. The female lions are smaller and they do most of the hunting, and the male lions are larger with long manes, especially like this one in the back. But many people don't realize why the lion's manes are there. Lots of people once believed that manes existed to protect a male's neck during fights. But it's been found that males actually aim for the back and the hips of their rivals. Instead, it's hypothesized that these manes signal a male's genetic quality. Females prefer males with longer, darker manes, and these males are often found to have healthier offspring and longer lives. The manes increase the body temperature of the male lion, making it more difficult for them to last through the hot summers of the savannah, which can prove to the female lions that they're good at surviving even with this trait that makes life more difficult. A lion pride may have as many as 40 individual lions, with 1 to 4 males, up to a dozen or so females, and their offspring. The young start to develop manes around a year old, and when they reach 2 or 3 years, they're kicked out of the pride. These loner males will often join up with other males, often relatives, to form a group called a coalition, and together they'll hunt and seek out new prides.